Hi, folks. How y'all doing? All right. I just want to give some of the stragglers an extra minute or two to sign in here, and then we'll get started.
So I am just a little bit confused about the deadline on the treatment, because I've heard like that was another one where there were different things said. The web courses says it's Friday. Is that what it's supposed to be?
I will check the current due date. What I tried to do is give you guys a little extra time on a couple of things. So I might have stretched a due date since we spoke last week, just to try and space it out a little better for you, because I know things got bunched up pretty good in the beginning. I think I moved it back a day or two
Okay.
from what it had been.
So are the due dates currently listed on web courses the correct ones?
Yeah, like on your assignment page, for instance. Let's take a look at what you guys are dealing with here. So we are in, okay, let's back up to, let's see, where's your last assignment? Okay, for instance, here, story pitches, January 21st. I think that one stayed the same, but I think what I did was added, let's see, story idea. Let me go this way. Where is the treatment? Now I don't see them. Here we go. Section 3A treatments. Okay. So yeah, January 29th. I think it was initially in there as the 26th. And I realized that it was probably bogging you down against your pitch deadline, which was, I think, this past Sunday. So I backed it out a couple of days. Stuff like that, just to give you a little extra time, because I don't want this to start, stacking on top of itself here. So hopefully that helps. I know that one of you was saying that you try to space out your, your work responsibilities accordingly. And so when I went back and looked at web courses and started looking at some of the dates, I realized I could give you a little bit more room. So that's what I tried to do. So, and because I know that this, I don't know how you guys feel about this semester, but for me, having been hired like so very, very late, and having no time to prep, I know that I felt very much under the gun here. And so I have had to, almost throw some of these courses together at the last second. And, I'm just now getting caught up with that barrage and realizing that, if I can give you some extra time on stuff, I will. Because I think I've said this before, I'm not as hung up on the due dates at this point as I am on you at least getting a chance to take a crack at the assignments to produce some of these pieces of work. So you have, something of a portfolio to show for your time spent. So that's really my focus at this point. So I'm not really hung up on assigning late points and stuff, at least not at this point in the semester. If things settle down and it feels like more of a comfortable groove that we're in, we might be able to get back on something of a more responsible track in terms of due dates. But for now, I just want to see that everybody has a chance to turn something in. Okay. So that's really what I'm concerned about now. I've started looking at, I think I've gotten halfway through your TV pitches at this point. So some of you have received a grade and some feedback. Some of you, I realize, are still waiting. I'll need a little bit more time to finish those. So just bear with me. One of the things that I did ask you folks to think about in some of the feedback is to make sure you use a proper naming convention for your files. Okay. This is standard stuff. Okay. Every college does it. And I'm frankly surprised that you're apparently hearing it for the first time from me, because if you turn something in online as a file in a class and your name is not on it, there's absolutely no excuse for that. A, it's not efficient on your part. It's not efficient on my part, because then I've got to go through and figure out whose paper that is. And sometimes it's easier said than done. And not only that, but when you get out in the professional world of creating documents, creating intellectual property, and submitting it virtually or otherwise as a file, and your name is not on things, okay, it's not gonna reflect well on your professionalism, because everything that you turn in out there in the real world that's a document in file form, you're going to be getting paid for, you know. And so if there's no name on it, who are they going to pay? Who are they going to pay for that work, for that document? Okay, so you definitely want to make sure your name is on things. In some cases, like time cards and paychecks, if you don't sign your time card at the end of the week, they will not issue you a paycheck. Okay, that's standard payroll service protocol, right? Because that signature is your acceptance of the contract between you and the payroll company, that they will take your taxes out, they will represent you as your employer of record for future reference, and so forth. So you don't sign that, it's in effect you haven't signed a contract, and you don't get paid for an unsigned contract. Okay, so treat your name and your naming convention kind of like your signature on your files. So give me your last name, first initial, what assignment number or name it is, and then, you know, just put FIL3102 on it so that I know it came from this class and not any of my other classes. And then, because when I batch download these files, a lot of times web courses will let me go into the grade book and just bulk download everybody's submission, so I have them in a file. That way I can grade even though maybe web courses goes down, for instance, and I don't have access to the internet for a day. I could still grade your papers, and then when I regain access, I can enter the grades. Okay, but if I've got a bulk file full of stuff that says TV template PDF, I don't know whose that is, right? And so even though in this particular assignment, I am opening them up and I am reading and providing feedback, if I just needed to quickly tick a box, who turned something in and who didn't, I can go down that register of files that I downloaded and see all your last names, boom, 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 and I can go into Rub courses and check it all off. Otherwise, I got to start opening stuff up, and that costs me time sometimes. And believe it or not, I've got well over 200 students this semester that I'm looking at documents from. So I need your help to help me be as efficient as possible. Okay, so that's all I want to say about naming conventions. I sent out that announcement, so you've got that, you know, that little sort of template to follow there. In terms of the TV templates, I've been, you know, looking at, if you gave me more than one, I've been looking at the first one you submitted. I'm assuming the first one you submitted is your best one. You always lead with your best idea. So I'm looking at that one and I'm giving you feedback on that one. Okay. If you're giving me more than one and you wanted me to look at a different one for future reference, you should always put your best foot forward. So give me your best idea first, right? Don't save the best for last. Okay. Pitch the best one first, because if that one's no good, there may not be any reason to mention the other two ideas to a studio exec, right? And if you pitch them the bad idea first, that the first impression you've made with that studio exec is you gave them a bad idea. Now you got to work extra hard to overcome the first impression that you made, which was a bad one, on your second attempt, which they are viewing as a charitable consideration for their time. Always pitch your best idea first. Okay. Bum, 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 bum. So, okay. I'm going to have a guest speaker for you guys next Thursday. She is
on the 28th, or next Thursday as in February 4th.
February 4th, right. She is a professional writer. She sold scripts to television broadcasters. She has been a member of the DGA She has directed some episodes of television and written episodes for television, and is currently writing feature scripts and teaching. And her name is Betty Goldberg. So we're going to have Betty come in, like I said, next week on Thursday, and just talk to you about being in the business and writing scripts for television and what that's all about and what it feels like. And you guys can ask her questions. I'm going to try and cap it at a half an hour, but if it's a real productive conversation and it seems like it's going places, we can give it more time. We'll see how it goes. But so I wanted to sort of give you guys that opportunity next week, in lieu of maybe another truncated discussion about some things we're going to kind of start talking about today. In that regard, one of the things I'm sure that Betty's going to talk to you about is, the writing process. So, for instance, I don't think she's really big on a lot of the documents that we use now, because her writing experience began in the late 70s, early 80s for television and television's heyday. And, I wanted you to hear a contrasting opinion on that matter, because some of you, may be at the stage in your process where you don't feel like a lot of these documents are necessary. What I'm trying to offer you is a process that you can follow if you have no process and you're looking for a way to establish good habits as a writer, so that as you create your own work and you want to start entering the field, you'll have some sense of what you should be creating and in what ways that are both appealing and expected by the studio executives that are out there now buying content. Okay. And part of it is because as a writer, you may work alone, you may work with a partner, you may work in a stable of writers on a TV show, for instance. When you work with a stable of writers, a lot of times they will delegate writing responsibilities to each member of that staff. For instance, somebody writes backstory and storylines on one particular character, somebody's working on another particular character, or each person might be responsible for writing their own episodes for that particular series. However, they want to break down the responsibilities, and there is accountability for that to the group and to the producers. And if you work alone, especially, there's accountability to a producer. For instance, if they give you a concept that they've purchased at say Pitch Fest, right? They bought somebody's treatment idea, but they don't have any scripts and they don't have any character dossiers. They don't have anything like that. They're not going to hire you to simply write for them without some accountability and without some idea of what this material is that you're generating, because you're going to start writing in pre-production before principal photography on that product, whatever it is, TV show or feature film, even begins. Okay. And so there will be accountability to a producer. So for instance, if you're writing a script, producer might call you in for a weekly meeting and say, okay, I want to talk about the characters that are appearing in the show. I want to hear what you've got for their backstories. I want to know what you're thinking about in terms of their subtext, their character arc, and how their character arc is going to change over the course of a series and as well as over the course of each episode. Okay. And they're asking you questions like that for very specific reasons. As the writer, you're creating content that other creatives are going to use to focus their performance. So a director is going to want to know subtext and backstory on your characters so that they can start helping the actors, figure out what their performances are going to be in rehearsals before production even starts. Okay. The actors are going to want to know, what's my story? What's my arc? How's my character going to end the season? You have to have these answers for them ahead of time. You can't just sort of sit down and write organically. You're not the only person in this process now. Think about film and television, particularly television. Think of it as a manufacturing process, and there's a lot of stages in the process, and there are a lot of people involved in that process that need to know what's going on. So you can't be the only one that has the ideas in your head and not be sort of generating documents like this that can inform all of your collaborators in terms of what's going on. Okay. It's really important at that point to work from that point of view. Okay. So that's, that's why I'm trying to offer you this process of, treatments and character dossiers and beat sheets, so that you'll have a sense of what kind of documents might be expected of you. If you landed a job on writing for a TV series, you're going to need to be accountable for what's being created, and you're going to take direction, and then you're going to have to show them how you have expedited their directives to you in the form of your written documents. Okay. And this is one way to do it. Now, in Betty's case, she writes feature films now. So that's kind of an insular process where you work alone for a lot of the time. And if, in her case, she wrote TV scripts for many years before she started writing features. So she already kind of had a personal process sort of ingrained that she's utilizing now. And that's a little bit different because she's drawing on years of experience at this point. So in the absence of years of experience or prior experience writing for a different format or genre, I offer you the process we're working through now. I also want to talk to you really quickly about focusing on good grammar. Okay, because in some of the documents I'm seeing some stuff that's not quite copacetic. Okay, now what I don't want to do is I don't want that to become a grading rubric or any kind of criteria, other than an obvious mention. You might want to brush up a little bit on your grammar. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of grammar that does not rise to the level of college level writing. Okay, so if you struggle with something like that, there are tools at your disposal that you can use. You can use Grammarly, for instance, online, which is really good. And there's a number of services within the Grammarly sort of ecosystem that can help you. Like, it can check your documents for spelling errors. It can check your documents for punctuation errors. It can check your documents for grammatical inconsistencies and offer you solutions to what it cites as potential problems or potential risk of grading deductions. Okay, so Grammarly is a really good tool that I recommend highly if you're not using it already, and you either understand and realize that you're struggling with grammatical issues, or if you've been cited for grammatical issues on any of your documents. Okay. Also consider, and one of the things that I find very valuable as a writer is, having someone read your work and get the feedback from an independent set of eyes and an opinion on either tone or flow or grammar, or, if it's simply editorial discussion about your punctuation and grammar, and have them point those things out to you. It'll help you get better at that process. And here's why. And I did very briefly for maybe 6 months in my career. In the very, very beginning, when I first dropped out of film school, I went to work for a production company at Universal Studios. And because I was, I had been a student, and it had been like a year and a half since I'd worked professionally on anything, they gave me a job, oddly enough, as a script reader. And so one of the jobs that I did for them, amongst some other, office and clerical work and stuff, was I read all of their incoming script documents that had been sort of unofficially solicited to the production company. In other words, they just get this stuff in the mail, and they may have put out, an announcement asking for, scripts, or it may have just sort of come as a matter of course. Some people just get they get a list of occupants at Universal in Orlando, or not so much Orlando anymore, but maybe out in LA. They get a list of all the production companies, and they just do a mail bombardment of scripts out to those production companies, hoping that somebody will read their work and think it's, genius, and, want to buy that document. So I used to read scripts for them. And one of the things that script readers will do, especially out in LA, where there's readers at every production company, These folks will qualify your work in any way possible so that they don't have to read the entire document. And the first criteria they have is if they see an inordinate amount of grammatical errors, spelling errors, punctuation errors, they'll just throw your script in the garbage and they won't read it. Okay. And that's the truth. And I will have people, if I can, come in to tell you that truth as well from the horse's mouth. Okay. But think about it. I mean, at a production company, they might, they might get a dozen, 2 dozen scripts in the mail every week, 52 weeks out of the year. They got 500-600 scripts stacking up. And even though they don't want to tell you, no, don't send it, they also kind of don't have time to deal with it, but they're always willing to concede that there might be a gold nugget in a pile of aggregate, and it's worth their time to pay somebody to read all those scripts to make sure that they don't miss an opportunity, because nobody wants to be the production company that finds out they had the next Silver Linings Silver Linings playbook in their script hopper at the office, and they didn't read it, so they didn't know that it was there, and they didn't option it. And another production company who also received a copy of the script did read it and did option it, and they lost an opportunity. So they don't want to lose that either. So they'll pay somebody to read all those scripts, and then they'll say, look, if you think it's worth investigating or having our producers look at it further, put it in this bin. If you think it's garbage, throw it away. If you're not sure, put it here and take a second look at it maybe next week or whatever. So they have criteria for sort of stratifying and then, eliminating what they don't want to deal with and keeping only the absolute best stuff. So if you send them a document that doesn't look like it was written by a professional, and professionals presumably don't make grammatical errors and spelling errors and punctuation errors, if it looks like it was written by an amateur, they'll throw it away. They won't even read it. Okay. Because they're going to assume that an amateur doesn't know what they need, doesn't know what they're looking for, doesn't know how to structure or format their documents appropriately. They don't understand, and they're assuming an amateur doesn't understand what the needs of producers and production people need in terms of a working script. Okay. And they'll throw it away. So please, give that the appropriate level of attention on your part. I like to also read my stuff, even to myself, out loud. If I have a paragraph in front of me on the page, the printed word, if I can't read it back with a comfortable cadence that feels conversational, where I'm not stumbling over pronunciation, I'm not stumbling over phonetics, it's not clumsy word order. If I can simply read that paragraph and have it sound natural, I call it mouthfeel, have it sound natural coming out of my mouth, I'm going to go back and I'm going to reconstruct that paragraph so that it's worded more efficiently and more appropriately. Okay. And in the process, I'm going to make sure that my grammatical choices are by the book correct. Okay. So things like Grammarly can help you with that. If you're writing your documents in Word, for instance, before if it's something other than an actual script, if you're writing in Word, for instance, there's spell checker in Word. You can activate spell checker in Final Draft as well. You have tools at your disposal. I should never see a document that has a spelling error or a punctuation error in it, because you have punctuation error correction in Word, you have punctuation correction in Final Draft, and you have spelling in both of those applications as well. Okay. So if I see a lot of that, just understand I'm probably not going to gig you too hard as a grade, because I don't want to hover on that as my criteria, but I might mention it to you. And, I would expect that you'll do your best to clean it up, because I'm just use this as a warning. If you do that out in the world, you're not going to get read. Okay. So somebody asked me for a sample of a treatment for the treatment assignment. And so I did put something up there for you, and I put a PDF up there that I thought you would find helpful. Just know that, I'm sorry if I generated any confusion asking you for a treatment. I assumed that you learned at least that much in your story writing class. So I now know that this is something that you're not being given in your only other writing class prior to this one. So I will keep that in the, in the course structure moving forward is the sample for you to follow. It's from a film that's, gosh, I think Mr. and Mrs. Smith is about 15 years old by now, but it was a popular movie at the time. It did well in the box office. And so I used that as a, as an example for you to just take a look at. You don't have to follow really any of these templates verbatim, as long as you create your own document in the spirit with which the template was created in the first place, which is to make sure that all of the right kinds of details are being presented, the right kind of character profiles are, coming through clearly in their descriptions, so that other people who are making these projects with you, your collaborators, are on the same page and they understand what you see in your mind's eye, what you think is appropriate for these characters. Okay. Wardrobe people are going to look at your documents. Makeup people will look at your documents. Cinematographers will look at your documents. Directors will look at your documents, and actors will look at your documents in many cases. In many cases, your documents will become part of the show Bible that we talked about last week. Okay. Especially character dossiers, because that's where our understanding of that character is coming from. It's your character. Tell us what that character is all about. If you leave anything for us to invent on the production end, it may or may not be consistent with your vision of what that character was in the first place. So given that it's your character that you created, the assumption is you want us to render that character with as much accuracy as possible. So give us as much information as you can in these documents about your characters, your world, and your story. Okay.
Are there any important differences between making a treatment for a movie and then making a treatment for a show?
There's no real standard. So there could be, from your point of view, there could be. Your process for writing a TV script, understanding what you know about TV, could be somewhat or greatly different from how you approach a feature film. So yeah, there could be a difference, but I always view a treatment as a fairly broad but detailed look at your story. And then you may or may not include, character information in that treatment. It could be a straight up, simply, full fledged synopsis, right? Including as many of the details as possible with maybe episode details and pilot episode details. That would be different from a feature film. You don't have subsequent episodes in a feature.
Mm-hmm.
Although if you're trying to write a tent pole, right? If you're writing the next superhero movie, you might fully intend for there to be sequel potential in your initial offering. So you might have sequel information in your treatment. Especially if you intend to leave a cliffhanger at the end of your movie, with a clear opening to a sequel, you might talk about that in your treatment. It's almost kind of up to you, but just bear in mind that that treatment you're creating is a document you're going to give to somebody else, and they have to understand. You're going to get like 3 minutes to talk to the studio exec from Universal. If you don't make whatever impression you don't make in that meeting has to reside in that document as a leave behind, so that they can go back to that document the next day or a week later and refresh their minds about you, and then read everything they need to know about that story so they can make a decision whether to buy or pass.
And there's no particular format, so we're not going to get like points off if we make our own format or include or don't include other sections in the example.
Right. So like, especially with the pitch template, I told you, if there's something there that doesn't apply, you don't have to include that in the template. If you don't have a collaborator, don't tell me I don't have any collaborators, just don't mention it. Right. So just take that out of the template. And along those lines, I noticed that many of you submitted a template to me without the prompts removed. Okay. Assume that I'm a studio exec, treat it in that respect. You wouldn't send a studio exec a filled in template with template prompts in it. That's just not done. Okay. So after you answer the prompt, go back into the template and remove the initial question, so that the only thing left in that under that heading is your response to that question in that heading. Don't leave the initial, templated prompt in there. I don't want to see that as a studio exec, and I don't want to even think about the fact that you're working from a template process. I just want to see your document, see those, questions you're trying to answer for me with your explanations contained therein. Okay. So, clean all that stuff out of these templates if you have a template in your assignment. Okay.
All right, and last question for now. I wanted to include a list of like my characters and description of them in my treatment. How many characters should I mention? Should I only mention like my main characters? Could I also mention the side characters, the antagonists, the like supporting?
Definitely protagonists and antagonists, definitely, right?
Mhm.
If it's a feature script and you want to add like supporting roles to the protagonist and to the antagonist, I think that that's a fair thing for you to do. If you think that it's important, you should probably include it. If it's an ensemble movie, where you got 15 characters, if that's the format of your film and you're giving character backgrounds in your treatment, you probably need to add them all. But if it's Batman and Robin, you don't have to tell me about the butler, and you don't have to tell me about the girlfriend, and you don't have to tell me about all that other stuff unless they play a significant part in the story.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions along those lines? How are your treatments coming along? Okay. You may or may not have started it yet. You may still be working on, well, I got character dossiers for you to work on this week as well. So you may choose to work on those first. But I'm available for questions if you have any on those particular aspects. So feel free to reach out to me at any time if you get stuck on something. I'm going to share my screen now so we can look at the presentation and check web courses really quick. Okay, so before I get into this, so we are here, okay? I call this section who, what, when, where, why do I care, right? And it goes part and parcel with a video I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes. So I've given you some worksheets for you to think about from script notes. I gave you an article on creating a protagonist and creating an antagonist. And I also want you to think about something that all of these writers really talk about. Peter Russell talks about it a lot. It's your character's wound. One of the aspects of your character's behavior or personality or past that affects how they behave, how they talk, or what they do in the present time frame of your story. Okay, so it's kind of like subtext in a way, which we'll talk about a little bit more next week. So that's why I say the discussion we have today is going to sort of overlap a little bit with subtext, because I think it's all kind of one and the same thing, but I'm trying to separate it out and talk about just character creation now, and then talk about backstory maybe a little bit more next week. We're going to also talk about your beat sheets at some point this week. I think that comes on Thursday. Your reading will be introducing you to the 20 master plots document that I gave you in PDF form. That was by Tobias. And it's a lot like the 45 master characters book that I gave you. This just deals with plots. Like, he's saying there's only X number of legitimate plot structures, and then everything else is sort of a variation on the existing themes. And it's kind of an interesting, discussion about that way of approaching creating stories. And again, it's something there that's for a guide. Most of the book is examples. It's like a catalog of plot scenarios, and only the first couple of chapters, or I think in the case of the beginning of these handful of chapters, he gives you a specific thing to think about. And then he gives you examples based on that point that he's making. So I've outlined a little bit on invisible fiction, about the way plots boil down, forces moving within the story, deep structures, triangular storylines, or interrelationships between storylines or characters, and then a little bit on master ploys. And that's all the real reading, and treat it lightly. Don't, don't read it like a book, read it, read it like a reference document. Okay. So that it doesn't feel like a burden and a ton of pages. Like this is maybe, I don't know, 40 or 50 total pages. But I don't want you to sit there and close read it. Okay. Read the, the main points from each section. Read the topic sentences in big paragraphs to get the gist of what this is about. So you know where the information is, again, if you need to go find it. Okay, because this is the kind of reference material that you'll use over and over again over the years. So a familiarity with where certain concepts are within the book that you can go straight to when you need it is a good thing to be able to do. We're going to talk about characters having pivotal moments. And then if we have any time, we can look at a couple of treatment examples. Okay, so let me get to the keynote, or let's look at web courses really quick to just mirror this. So here we are. Last week on Thursday, you had the pitches, a little bit of that discussion. I'm trying to give you as much feedback as I can in my grading. Hopefully it helps. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out. This week, your assignment is going to be character dossiers, and that's what I want to show you in the presentation now. So let's look at that real quick. We are in week 3 now. Feels later in the semester to me. I don't know, but I don't know how you feel about it, but it's only the beginning of week 3. So we're going to talk a little bit today about who, what, when, where, why, and why do I care? Characters and their development and their wounds. So I think I mentioned this to you last week, that characters, as much, maybe more so than content, is actually king, if we're thinking about our little mantra. And this is from Robert McKee. So he wrote Story. I just gave this to you guys last week. He's saying that true character is revealed in the many choices that human beings make under pressure. So the greater the pressure, the deeper the revelation, or the deeper the truth about that character, and the more light it shines on that character's choices and actions, right? So it's showing us a character's essential nature, he says. Okay. So how many of you have seen No Country for Old Men? Is there anybody who hasn't seen it?
I've seen it.
So raising your hand was the affirmative. Who hasn't seen it? Anybody not seen the movie?
I haven't.
You haven't?
I have
No, I
seen
haven't.
scenes from it, but I haven't seen it from beginning to end.
So you've seen enough of it to know basically what goes on.
Yes, sir.
Is that a fair assumption? Okay, good. That's probably sufficient. What you might do is consider rewatching it just for some background information or for your own edification. If you have seen it before, anybody dislike the movie? Anybody have issues with the storyline or any of the characters? So we basically liked the film when we thought that it was an effective piece of fiction.
I didn't really like it.
Did not?
Yeah, I didn't really like it.
Okay. Any basis for that opinion, or just sort of a sense that you have?
I think it's mostly honestly that I don't really like movies that take place like kind of Western, and it just felt a little bit like it dragged on, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, it is a little bit slow in that regard, because it's kind of, I call it a think piece. You've really got to think about the characters and what's going on, and it's a little bit more than surface exposition. You got to think about what the actions that are taking place. And in this particular case, I think it also helps to be at least somewhat familiar with the original novel that it's based on by Cormac McCarthy, because that gives you a lot of background on stuff that may or may not be really kind of covered well in the feature film. But I want to look at this as one particular example and cite some things for you to think about in terms of that film. Okay, so if you recall from Lahush Egri, he's talking about characters saying every object has 3 dimensions: depth, height, width, and human beings have similar features, and then 3 additional dimensions, and those are their physiology, their psychology, and their psychology. Okay, so their makeup, their interactions with others, and their internal mechanisms, right? Without a knowledge of these 3 dimensions, we cannot appraise a human being, he insists. Okay, so I'm going to take him on his word that that's the case. Lahush Egri also solicits a lot of reinforcement or affirmation from the workings of Carl Jung, who's a sort of a famous philosopher from the last century, who's written a number of books and whose opinions and theories were the basis of modern psychology for a number of years before it started falling under scrutiny. So I'm going to take for granted that Lahush is on the right path with this assumption. And he's going to further that assumption by saying it's not enough in your study of a man to know if he's rude, polite, religious, atheistic, moral, or a degenerate. You must know why he's those things. We want to know why man is the way he is, why his character is constantly changing, if it's constantly changing, and why it must change, whether he wishes it to or not. So we're always answering these questions, why, because this is presumably what our audience is thinking when they watch our movies and watch our TV shows. Why does Fonzie behave the way he does? Why does this character say the things they say? You know, why doesn't Sam want to marry the I forget the lady bartender's name? You know, why are these characters behaving this way? Because presumably we have an opinion about it and it may differ from what's happening in the story. And it's that sort of conflict or that friction that either engages us or pushes us away and rebuffs us from watching a show in the first place. So I think we're always concerned with the why in terms of our characters and what they say and what they do. And this little film sort of addresses that pretty nicely. It's a little analysis very quickly of Interstellar. You guys have all seen Interstellar, right? So what's Matthew McConaughey's problem? I'm asking you that. This is my question. What's Cooper's wound?
He's torn between choosing his career and his family.
In what way?
He either has to leave to go to space for a very long time or stay with his daughter and watch his daughter grow up.
Yeah, right? That's tough. He's not just going to the office, right? He's going on a trip, and this trip is going to project him in a rocket ship beyond the speed of light. And if you understand, or if you're familiar at all with the Einstein paradoxes of the speed limit, the physical speed limit of the speed of light, and what happens to the chronology of time as you approach the speed of light, we understand that there is a time differential that takes place. The closer you approach the speed of light, the more time warps and slows down for the participants in the movement. So anybody inside the spaceship is affected by a different chronology than anyone outside of the bubble of the spaceship that is not traveling at the speed of light. And the problem with Matthew McConaughey going to work in this movie is he's not going to come back in his daughter's lifetime, probably. Or he's going to come back and miss 20 or 30 years of her own progressive growth because he's been traveling at beyond the speed of light to go look for new Earth-like planets for the human species to migrate to, right? That's a serious problem, right? And it's causing him a great amount of anxiety because it's a choice with a lot of weight. It's his daughter or anything. And Matthew McConaughey. So part of Matthew McConaughey's problem is also his pride, right? He believes firmly in his ability to achieve the goal of the mission, which is to find a qualified place for humans to live. He knows, or he feels in his heart, that he's one of a very small group of people, and they all happen to be chosen for this mission. They're the only ones that can really accomplish this mission effectively. And so it's that knowledge of himself and that belief of himself that's presenting this conundrum in the first place. If he didn't think of himself as a very good astronaut, he probably wouldn't go. But he thinks he is one of the few people who can actually pull this thing off. And so he feels an obligation to go, and the weight of the responsibility against the preference of his daughter's personal experience and growth is what's at stake for his character. And that's one hell of a, that's one hell of a conundrum. So he has to deal with that in the course of accomplishing the goals of his mission as well. Let's check it out.
Well, we used to look up in the sky and wonder at our place in the stars. Now we just look down and worry about our place in the dirt.
This world was never enough for you, was it, Coop?
Well, because heading out there is what I feel like I was born to do. Mankind was born on Earth. It was never meant to die here. This world's a treasure, Donald. It's been telling us to leave for a while now.
Couldn't you have told her you were going to save the world?
No.
Stay. It says stay, Dad.
When you become a parent,
Why?
one thing becomes really clear. And that's that you make sure your children feel safe.
Do you see your children?
No, I'm coming back.
When?
All these messages are just drifting out there in the darkness.
Come on, Murph. Don't make me leave like this, Murph.
Do not go gently into that good night. Old age should burn, rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying light. No wise men at their end, no dark is right. Because their words had fought no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night.
You were my ghost. You once told me that when you came back, we might be the same age.
Don't let me leave, Murph.
And today I'm the age you were when you left. This might be a real good time for you to come back.
Don't let me leave, Murph.
Love isn't something we invented. It's observable, powerful. Maybe it means something more, something we can't yet understand.
It's me, Murph. I wish you knew.
I know nobody believed me, but I knew you'd come back. Because my dad promised me.
Do you think it's funny?
I have my kids here for me now. You can go.
So I think this little vignette is interesting in the sense that on the surface, this movie is about a guy who has to hop in a spaceship. Earth is dying, so he has to hop in a spaceship and fly around the local group in the the close galaxy confines to the Earth, and look for a suitable new place for mankind to move to, essentially. And he's got a group of comrades, and they all hop in the ship and they go and they look for these places together, but they have to also solve the Einstein-Rosen bridge problem, and they have to, so they have these problems with time dilation and all this stuff. And so on the surface, it's just that movie, right? It's strictly science fiction, and it's about finding a new place for the human race. But the thing that makes the story kind of interesting is it uses those very mechanisms of the plot to create these traps for the main protagonist to deal with, right? So we learn in the course of the story that he's going to be on a very tight schedule. And if he lingers for too long in any particular place or at any particular stage in his tour of the local habitable systems, it's going to cost him years of chronological time on Earth. And the longer he pauses in a particular place, the more time is going to pass by. And the older and older and older Murph, his daughter, is going to be by the time if and when he returns to Earth, right? So every time he suffers a setback and it costs him extra minutes or hours, years of chronological time are going by on Earth, and his daughter is getting older and older, and the likelihood of him returning to Earth in time to see her before she passes away in her normal time frame becomes less and less likely. And that adds a lot of emotional weight to the decisions that Cooper's making, and the stuff that he says, and the urgency that he feels, and the way he responds and reacts, and the choices he ultimately makes to successfully complete his mission, right? So it adds an extra dimension that can engage the audience on an emotional level. So if the action and the rocket ships and the science fiction backdrops aren't enough to engage your audience and draw them in, we have this emotional connection to these characters, this Cooper in particular, and Murph, his daughter, to sort of draw us in and get us to invest in Cooper's success, right? So we start watching the movie and rooting for the hero to win, because if he does, he gets to see his daughter again. And if not, he may or may not even return to Earth. And if he does, it may be many, many, many years too late in the future. So it's an interesting way to think about character construction, is give them more than a surface objective to accomplish, because if it's just laying on the surface, it may or may not be ample to engage your audience or get your audience to really invest in your story and suspend their disbelief. The whole notion of us creating motion pictures in the first place was to give an audience a couple of hours of sort of cathartic release where they could go into the theater and sit in the dark and watch a story projected that will transport them, help them forget about the remains of the pain and the remains of their day, help them to relax and fantasize for a little while, take their mind off of the harsh reality of their day-to-day struggle to work and pay the bills and feed the family and, whatever. Right. So we're creating these stories, we're getting these folks, we're drawing them in off the street to watch our stories, and we really want to transport them. So the more you think about your character development and the backstories that you give your characters and the color that you give them, really helps to create that audience engagement. So from story, Robert McKee says the finest story writing not only reveals character, but it bends or changes their inner nature, for better or worse, over the course of the telling of your tale. So what we want to see, or what he's suggesting we should see, are significant changes in our character, either for bad or for good, that are compelling for the audience and that show us some kind of significant change. In terms of nature, a character must be credible. They are either young enough or old enough, strong or weak, worldly or naive, educated or ignorant, selfish or generous, witty or dull, in the right proportions. Each character must bring to the story the combination of qualities that allow an audience to believe that the character could or would behave as he does, right? It's believable. It has tangible believability, right? I oftentimes will read my dialogue back to myself, or I might have somebody help me, another reader, and just read the dialogue, and I'll ask, does that sound natural to you? Do you believe that? Because if it doesn't sound believable, then it's probably going to ring hollow to your audience as well, And oddly enough, before I really started focusing on the craft of writing, I used the same approach to my lighting when I was lighting a motion picture, especially if you're lighting a set on a soundstage that's not a real building in the first place. It's been manufactured to look like the interior of an apartment or the interior of a restaurant or the interior of an old drafty castle, right? But it's really just a bunch of flats that have been nailed together and painted and decorated convincingly on one side so that when you photograph them, they look like those backdrops you suggest in your story. So when you light something like that, especially on stage where you have no context in reality, in other words, no windows to give you real sunlight, no real sun inside the soundstage, no real torches or real chandeliers, you have to put them in, and then you have to energize them or supplement them with your own theatrical lighting to appear to be doing what they would really do in nature if they were really a chandelier in a castle or a torch in a hallway or whatever it is. And it needs to look real. So a lot of times I would ask myself, I'd stand at the monitor and I would look at what I saw on the monitor, and I would look at the set and I would ask myself, do I believe what I see in front of me? Does this really look like the interior of a restaurant in Hillcrest in Los Angeles? I don't know. You know, as a lighting supervisor, many times, you know, I can remember being in a little restaurant called Little Dom's in Los Angeles, in Los Feliz, with my ex, and we would have coffee on Sunday mornings, and they had these beautiful windows. At the right time in the morning, the sun would come cascading through the windows, hit these sort of stained glass things they had hanging in the window to project color and light all over the room, and hit the brass behind the bar and all the glasses and all the bright work behind the bar. And the room would have this magical sort of twinkly quality to it that the raw sunlight would create as it came through the windows at, you know, 9:30 in the morning on a Sunday. And a lot of times I would just sit there and I would just look at what the light was doing and try to dedicate that to my memory so that I would have some context if I had to create that on a set on stage somewhere. What lights would I use? What intensity would they need to be? What color would the light need to be in order to mimic what I see in my mind's eye, what's before me right now? I used to get in trouble a lot because I would be apparently daydreaming and miss portions of conversations and get in a lot of trouble. But the reality is, you know, I was trying to provide my creative brain with a little context for what early morning light looks like in an interior of a coffee shop, so that if I ever had to recreate that on stage, I would at least have some idea of what that needed to be. And that would sort of form the basis for my approach to that lighting. And you can do the same thing with your characters using subtext. One thing to remember is the function of structure is to provide progressively building pressures that force characters into more and more difficult dilemmas. You're going to make them make decisions, and they're going to become increasingly more difficult, and the risks become higher and the choices become more critical. And gradually, the pressure and how the character responds to that pressure is going to reveal their true nature. And so the characters are going to behave in a way that is indicative of what their wound is or what their true nature is. And that is something that we need to think about in terms of creating characters. So let's talk about the who, what, when, where, why, and why do I care? This is created by a friend of mine. He's a script doctor out in Los Angeles, and this is something he put on his website for aspiring writers.
All stories are about who, what, where, when, how, why. Why should I care? Triangulation. What is it? I want it. You can't have it. This is the arc. I want the arc. You can't have the arc, Dr. Jones. This is the truth. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Character journeys. Feminine journey is about gaining power with each scene. Every scene, the female character gains power. There is power, 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 real power, and then there's the ultimate victory. Masculine journey is about loss of power. It's loss after loss after loss, and gaining the power to win over the villain. Dramatic plots, soap opera, on and on and on and on. Episodic, big problem, solve it, and roller coaster ride. One action after another. what where now translates into problem, plot, character. When they all are equal, you get a nice piece of action.
If you guys took a look around the story structure architect, you had a reading assignment out of here not long ago. If you looked in the, I think it's the second section, it starts talking to you about different types of scenarios that you might write about or construct your stories to resemble. And one of the things it shows you in each of those sort of scenarios is it shows you what the action line looks like. So you notice in this video, he's showing you how the female story structure tends to be gaining more and more and more advantage, and the male structure is losing all the advantages and trying to gain them back again. And this is based on the psychological aspects of, you know, the female heroine's personality, the male heroine's personality, and the assumptions that we make psychologically about these types of characters. Those assumptions are also, they also form the basis of our contemporary attitudes about male and feminine roles. Those assumptions may change over time as our overall society changes over time in terms of the way we view the roles of men and women in society. So this is one particular glimpse at these kinds of story structures at this moment in time. It'll show you what the peaks and valleys, what the inciting incidences look like, and what the resolutions look like, and the overall arcs of these stories. And each one of these has a different arc to it. So if you look at the roller coaster ride, this was the roller coaster ride, and all the peaks and valleys seem to be the same height, and they keep happening over and over and over again. It's the Nolan repetitive loop of story structure. Inciting incident, resolution, another one, a resolution, another one, a resolution, and oh, another one, and a resolution, and then finally the denouement, right? There's also, here's the melodrama. So the melodrama has one gradual sloping bell curve, right? A gradual increase in pressure, a climax and a release in pressure, and a denouement, right? One bell curve. And all of these are sort of outlined in here so you can take a look at them. Let's see, the romance is similar to the one I just showed you. The journey, here's the journey, okay? If you take a look at the graphic of what the journey might look like, you have a rise in action, a build of awareness, a leaving of the existing world, a setback, a rededication to the objective, and then challenge, climax, and resolution, right? So this is kind of a graphic representation of the hero's journey, which we're going to talk about. So that's kind of the stuff you can get from a lot of these instruments. The story structure architect is a particularly valuable tool in that respect. Okay, so you're going to get a character dossier PDF that you need to start looking at. I want you to do one of these for your protagonist and your antagonist. It's all built into the same document. I think page 1 is the protagonist, page 2 is the antagonist, and the top sheet is just asking a couple of basic questions about the story itself and what the journey of your protagonist is.
And I do have a question.
Yeah.
What if our lines between protagonist and antagonist aren't as clearly defined? So like my idea is based on like a Byronic situation.
Like sometimes when the protagonist is the antagonist?
Yes.
Then you might find a particularly difficult time with this document. You might have to find a way to synthesize this document to fit your situation.
Okay, so I don't have to use this template exactly. Like I can change it to fit my situation more accurately.
Yeah, you're going to have to if that's the case you're dealing with. Yeah, for sure. This document is based on the assumption that you have a separate protagonist and antagonist, okay, which is the majority of situations. Your situation that you're creating is fairly rare, so you're going to have to synthesize your own approach to this.
Okay.
But so we're asking some basic journey questions on page 1, and then some specific questions on page 2 and 3. Your protagonist, what's their name? What's their age? What's their height, their weight? what's their hair like? What do they like to wear? What's their ethnicity, their background, their race, whatever. If it's, you know, elves and goblins and dwarves and all that, you know, fill it all in, be specific, tell us some things about that protagonist and give us a little bit of their story here so we get a sense of who that character is. And I think that, you know, in the beginning, doing a lot of these things might help you with other choices you're going to have to make down the road. For instance, you can start thinking about whatever you create in this document, and this is all yours. It's your world, your characters, and whatever. But if you, for instance, use this document to its true advantage, and you really outline what your protagonist is all about here, and who they are, what they look like, how they would act, what they would say, where they were born, how they were treated, all of that. If that's in here, it kind of creates a set of rules for that character. And so if you get to a point in your script where you're writing and you say, man, I really hadn't thought this scene out fully, I'm not really sure what this character is going to do next. You can go back to stuff like your dossier and consult with your own rules on the matter. And if the character is inclined to behave a certain way because of a wound or a disposition or an upbringing or a cultural orientation, that might help you come to some kind of decision about how to move forward with a scene that has got you sort of stumped, you know? So this is the way in which this document might help you beyond simply filling it in. On the other hand, it's also an effective document for a collaborator like a producer. So like I said, if a producer came to you and said, we want you to create the script for a treatment that we bought at Pitch Fest, and we want you to put the characters in the treatment through this crucible as outlined in the treatment, and give us all the particulars and give us all the dialogue and what are they going to say and at what point are they going to say it and what happens to them along the way. You know, they're looking for the grail, right? We know that, you know, the king sends them out on a mission. Ultimately, they find the grail, but what happens between the, you know, the inciting incident and the solution? What happens and what do they say along the way? You're going to create stuff like this in stages of pre-production while you're writing to give the producers a sense of, you know, what your finished document's going to look like. A lot of times, you know, we don't want to show our scripts in the process of being written. We want to at least get a chance to get a draft down on paper before we let folks read it and tear it apart and suggest how we can change it and make it better, quote unquote. So stuff like this is good information to supply those collaborators in the meantime to keep them busy and to buy a little bit more time for you to finish your draft before they want to get in there and move things around. So like I said, it's 3 pages. It's just the protagonist and the antagonist. And do that for whichever one of the ideas that you want to work through to a short script by the middle of the semester. Okay. So we got a little bit of time here. I wanted to talk to you about the 3 characters in No Country for Old Men and see if it resonates with you guys. So Anton Chigurh, who is he? Who's Anton?
He's the killer.
He's the killer. He's the bounty hunter, right? Kind of. What does he want?
The money.
He wants the money. That's right. And he doesn't care who has it. He just needs to find that money and return it to the person who hired him. Now, here's the hard question. And maybe we shouldn't start with Anton Chigurh because he's the most sort of, I think, prolific and colorful character in the movie. But what do you suppose his wound is? And when I say wound, I don't mean he's got a gaping, bleeding mass on his leg and he's dying, he's bleeding out. I mean, what's affecting him on the inside? What psychological or physical manifestation makes him act the way he does? What belief system, what programming, what conditioning has he received to make him the way he is? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Anyone?
I'm the person who haven't seen it all the way through, but is it because it's taken him so long to find the money? Like, it's taking him so long to track down this person?
Well, not really. He finds what's his name? Llewellyn Moss. He finds Llewellyn in like the first 15, 20 minutes of the movie. So didn't really take him long to find the money. But we see some things. Anton demonstrates some behaviors in the time that we first see him and when he finally catches up with who Llewellyn is, where he came from, and what path he's on, and he starts to track Llewellyn. We see him do a few things. We see him kill a guy for a ride. We see him kill a cop. We see him interact with the gasoline attendant. And 2 out of those 3 times, there's a certain predictable outcome. And then one of those times there's not. And in the time that there's not, do you guys know the scene I'm talking about?
The quarter where he flips the coin.
The coin toss scene, right? So here's a guy, he's a hired bounty hunter and a killer. He's been hired to find this cartel's money. In the process, he needs transportation. So he hitchhikes and he finds a guy that pulls over and offers him a ride. And instead of just simply taking the ride into town, he kills the guy and takes the guy's truck. Then on the way to town, he gets pulled over by a cop, and the cop smells something funky and he wants to run the plates on the truck. And in the process, he arrests Anton, takes Anton to the pokey in town. Anton slips his bonds. He's a professional, right? So he had a way to get out of a set of handcuffs. And when the cop's not looking, because he's a small town cop who thinks that, the criminal is going to become docile once he's been captured and handcuffed, much to that cop's surprise, Anton strangles him to death when he's not looking, takes the keys, frees himself from jail, and he continues on his mission. Then in a little while, he needs some gas for his stolen car. He pulls into the gas station, and just at random, the attendant wants to strike up a conversation with Anton, not knowing what kind of guy Anton is. And Anton thinks it's a very strange situation. And he's going to kill the attendant, just like he killed the other 2 guys. He doesn't care. He kills everybody. But there was something about Anton's internal code, right, that made him give the guy a chance, because in other circumstances, presumably each of these individuals had presented Anton with a barrier to him getting what he needed. The cop was going to arrest him. The guy with the truck that he stole was only going to give Anton a ride, but once he got dropped off, he was still going to need a vehicle to get to his next destination. So he killed the guy and stole his truck. But all the attendant asked him was, what's the weather like where you coming from? How's your day going? And so then Anton has to create a scenario where, do I kill the guy or don't I kill the guy? So he offers the coin toss and he says, you call it. Right. And in that notion of creating the conflict with the coin, he presents the attendant with the whole reason why he's throwing the coin in the air in the first place. The attendant's offense in Anton's point of view is his life has amounted to nothing. And he has to now put it all up and risk it all in order to understand the significance and the value of what he has. And if he loses the bet, he's going to die. But if he wins the bet, he'll be allowed to live. And so he calls it heads or tails, right? So what we have in Anton's situation, and I have it written down under here, under his image, he is a prototypical ideopath who demonstrates primary psychopathic behavior. He's a psychopathic killer. And Woody Harrelson's character even says that, oh, he's a psychopathic killer, right? When he's describing Anton to the guys back in Dallas. He's a purist. He's an ideologue. He doesn't waver from his opinions or his belief systems. He's a metaphorical character, and he represents death, the randomness and the impersonality of death. Death is random. It happens to all of us eventually. He kills everyone eventually, right? But he does it with a very sort of non-personal, non-emotional investment. call it heads or tails. You can live today or die today. It's really up to you, but the responsibility is yours. So he's an ideologue. How about the sheriff? The sheriff is a little bit different. His wound is he doesn't feel like he fits into the current structure of society. He's old school. He's an older guy. He does things the old way, right? And the world is changing and new, and he doesn't feel like he relates to it anymore. So his wound could become emotional disassociation with the present. He lives in the past. He has dreams about his dead partner and his dead father, right? The father who preceded him as sheriff of the county, and now he's the sheriff of the county, and he's going to pass the baton at some point, and he's going to become the ghost who appears in his dreams representing the passage of time. So his wound is he is lacking confidence in his relevant nature. Am I relevant anymore, or am I a has-been? Right. And he has to confront the anomaly of Anton Chigurh, which doesn't worry about things like that. Anton only moves forward like a shark in the water. If he stops swimming, he drowns. Right. So Anton doesn't have any of these sort of emotional obstructions to deal with. He's just moving forward, and he's following his personal code of behavior, and he doesn't waver from that code. He's never going to stop and help a guy with a flat tire along the side of the road. Right? He'll keep on driving because it doesn't concern him, and he doesn't really care. The only reason he might stop would be if the car, by fixing the car's flat tire, it might represent a better ride than he's currently in. And then Anton might pull over and kill you for your car. But other than that, he doesn't care. He cares too much. He cares about being effective in a world where he feels he's becoming less and less effective. And so the rules that govern his behavior are accordingly. Does he want to meet with the bigwigs from Dallas and talk about the case? No, not really, because he doesn't want to get wrapped up in their emotional investment in catching this guy. He only wants to make sure his town is safe. And as long as that's the case, he's willing to mind his own business, because that's the old school way, right? What about Llewellyn Moss? It's a little harder. You've got to pay attention to what Llewellyn does and says in the movie to really kind of figure out what his wound is. So he's got a couple, I think, in my opinion. The first of which is he has a very innocent and demure wife at home who is very much emotionally dependent on Llewellyn, and Llewellyn being there for her. And she identifies with her relationship as Llewellyn's wife. And so, to Llewellyn, this is a responsibility that he bears. He's also, what we learn a little bit later in the script is he's a Vietnam vet. So Llewellyn, part of his disassociation and part of his burden is dealing with the trauma of having been to the Vietnam War and experiencing war. This is where he gets some of his skill sets from, like his tracking ability and, his handling of weapons, and his understanding of a situation when he comes upon the aftermath of a three-way competition and gunfight over some drugs and a bag of money, right? He can read the signs on the ground, figure out what happened, and then he tracks the survivor and finds the bag of money. And he figures all of that out using his skills as a tracker from Vietnam. So Llewellyn is dealing with his past, and he's dealing with his sort of mediocre present. He lives in a trailer in the middle of the desert in Texas. He's married, but, nothing about his life is fulfilling him necessarily. He's just kind of going through the motions because he feels empty and emotionally devoid due to his experiences in Vietnam, things that he had to do in war that had effects on his character and on his character's nature. So he's behaving in certain ways because of who he was and who he became. So each one of these characters, we have all of this backstory to think about. Some of it you get from the novel. some of it you get from the dialogue, and then some of it you get from critical analysis by other writers about what their opinions are about these characters and what these characters are going through. The best source of subtext is always firsthand going to be the novel, if the script is a derivative of a novel. You go to the original author and you read the book and you find out what the author's idea about these characters was, and then the author's reflection on those characters in the novel, because the script almost always is written with a high regard for what was contained in the novel. Okay. So I wanted to show you these particular characters and get you thinking about stuff like that, because we'll talk about subtext a little bit again next week. And I want you to think about your characters more as more than a simple means to an end. You know, if you have a hero that has a neighbor that helps him solve crimes, you know, what is it about his relationship with the neighbor? What kind of person is the neighbor that they would want to be involved in your hero's crime search? You know, are they a risk taker? Are they a, you know, a former criminal? Are they a reformed criminal? Are they an ex-cop? What is it about these characters and how they interact? What is it about them particularly that makes them unique, right? Because remember, there's only, according to Tobias, there's only 20 real plots, and every subsequent story is some weird combination of the 20 original premises, right? If that's true, then, you know, the only real asset or equity that we have are the characters that we create, because those are the things that we can protect with WGA and with copyright and so forth. You know, Three Guys Robbing a Bank is not a story you can copyright at the DGA or at the US Copyright Office. But Three Guys Dressed as Clowns, who are also members of a thrill daredevil cult addicted to adrenaline, who skydive on the weekend and chase waves all over the world and rob banks to fund their joyriding experiences, is definitely a copyrightable scenario. And those characters are definitely unique because they don't exist in every bank robbery movie, right? But if you write that story, you got Point Break, right? So think about that when you're creating your characters and when you're writing your stories, and try to give them a little bit more dimension than what simply lies on the surface. Any thoughts on that? Any feedback? Any questions, comments? Cricket.
I mean, I guess I have like a question for the class.
Yeah.
And just like want to see if anyone else is in a similar situation to me where the characters aren't as clearly defined into protagonist and antagonist. And if not, I mean, obviously, I'll just message you privately, Professor Walsh, but does the thumbs up mean that you are in a similar situation?
Most of you are all on mute. Don't forget. What do you think, guys?
Because like, I mean, I understand what you're saying. It's not like a norm. It's not like the traditional setup, but it's also not too horribly uncommon. Because like you even talk about, like you've talked about Breaking Bad in the past, and that's another situation with like a Byronic hero where like his personal demons are the main antagonistic force, not like an external person fighting against him.
I'm kind of in a similar scenario where I have two main characters fighting against a larger threat, but one of them sort of is, they sort of are each other's antagonists, not in the sense of like they're fighting directly, but in the sense of they present ideological obstacles to one another in terms of the way they do things. So they are kind of both the protagonist and the antagonist to each other, and there is also a larger antagonist sort of looming in the background, but that's not as important of a singular character.
Okay, just understand that there is a difference between the protagonist being the antagonist and a protagonist who is a bad guy, right?
Right.
Protagonist doesn't necessarily mean they're the good guy and the antagonist is the bad guy.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. But like, I know, like, speaking just like my case specifically, like, I don't know if this applies to anyone else, but my quote antagonist is really the character's inner demons. Like, that's the arc of the story.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, so are you working off of any examples or any inspirational material, movie, book, or otherwise?
So I think the closest, it's not exactly the same, but the closest thing you could think of would probably be American Psycho.
Okay. Yeah, because we're kind of in a weird sort of way engrossed with and maybe rooting for the lead character.
Right.
I forget his name in that movie.
Patrick Bateman.
But he is clearly a nut job.
Right.
And we know
And
that.
like the whole point of the arc of that character is that like his personal demons are the antagonist. The antagonists are not the people he's murdering. The antagonists aren't really the cops.
Yeah.
I mean, the cops are antagonists, but they're not the antagonist.
Right. So the idea there is, so we have symbolic antagonist and we have, the actual antagonist. So the cops they represent a certain outer layer of the story shell, and the real inner layer, the heart of what's going on, is the man versus himself conflict, the internal conflict of the main character.
And so for this document, I could see two different ways of approaching this particular document. Would it be advisable to do the symbolic antagonist of his inner demons, like specifically what those inner demons are, as the quote antagonist? Or should I approach it from a perspective where I have the characters, because I really have two characters that are going through similar parallelisms. It's like a yin and yang type thing, where I show their protagonistic elements and the antagonistic elements that are like in play in the characters.
Since you have a fairly clear understanding of what's going on in your story, and I don't have any context yet, or enough context, I would say take your own cues on this. But one way you could approach that sheet would be, since we're dealing with the same central character, you could use the protagonist page 2 to reflect all of the surface attributes of that character. Like, who does he represent? Who do people think he is? What is his outward persona for people in the story? And then treat the antagonist sheet on page 3 as demonstrating all those behaviors that represent the antithesis of his persona. So his persona being the protagonist, and then his internal constitution as the antagonist, his crazy side. So the antagonist sheet represents all of those aspects of that character that demonstrate or represent those behaviors, and you could look at it that way.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, cool. That's that's interesting. So you're taking that template and turning it on its head, which is cool. That's what hopefully we can all do at some point. But if if your story is not that complex, that's okay. Just treat that document as, at its face value. Describe your hero, describe your villain, and go from there. Okay. It's really up to you, and you can't really be wrong in a lot of this, because I mean, what's a wrong and incorrect story? I don't know, unless it just violates so many of the traditions that we expect, that we can consider it, boring or less entertaining. But I don't know that any of us can really be wrong. Use this document in whatever way helps you realize your story in the most effective way. Anybody else have any thoughts on that, or any of the other things that we're working on? I know we're doing a couple of things simultaneously. Hopefully you're going to see how one document can kind of beget the other document, though. It's not as though you're creating all these documents separately. It's all sort of the same process, and maybe each document represents a different way of looking at the same scenario of your story, but on different levels, right? That's hopefully how this is going to start feeling to you, so that it just offers you a way in every time you sit down and address this project and want to work on it, it gives you a different angle to look at it from, so that you can derive new and fresh inspiration about that story and carry it that much further in whatever time you invest in it when you sit down to deal with it, right? And in this way, you can avoid that sort of what I consider a fallacy of writer's block, because writer's block, I think, is simply a lack of information and a lack of inspiration. So if you have different ways of thinking about your project, and one of those ways is going to be more effective in inspiring you the day you sit down today or tomorrow to work on the next phase of it, then you have eliminated the writer's block problem that, that might be ailing somebody else as a writer. Okay. The whole idea is to give you mechanisms that will keep you productive and never cause a situation or lead you to a situation where you can't produce. If you write as a professional, you got to write on a day when you don't feel good just as effectively as on a day that you do feel well. So if you're, not particularly interested in writing today, but you've got a deadline because the episode you're working on is going to go to air 2 weeks from now, and between that time they've got to shoot it, you don't have any time to waste. You need to get that story told, get it into a script, and get it to the producers to turn into a show. There's no time for you to feel bad or poorly and nurse yourself back to emotional or physical health, right? If you're a professional writer, you got to bring it when it's asked of you, right? So writer's block is something that we have to conquer in our process of becoming writers. Okay. Anybody have any other questions or thoughts before we adjourn for the afternoon? Because I have another go-to meeting to attend to. No, we're all good? All
Yeah.
good. I'm seeing all the thumbs up. Okay, that's great. Okay, then let's adjourn. And as soon as I can get this transcribed and down converted and put up on YouTube, I'll put the link on Web Courses for you. And if you have any questions in the meantime, shoot me an email and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, I'll see you all Thursday. Okay, thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
one.
you.